Digital Foundry is sponsored by MSI's new range of next-generation QD OLED gaming monitors, with 27 and 32-inch 16:9 displays alongside 49 and 34-inch ultra-wides. These high refresh rate screens feature a graphene film with a custom heatsink, gaming intelligence AI features, and MSI Care 2.0 OLED burn-in protection. Check out the video description to learn more about MSI's excellent range of OLED gaming panels.
Returning to Elden Ring 2 years on, the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion gives us a fresh chance to reassess developer FromSoftware's work, to see how the game runs on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, S, and PC today across the new Shadow Realm map after a 2022 launch that showed a string of performance issues. We're talking about the major sub-60 FPS drops on console. We're talking about the traversal hitches on PC we saw at launch. The hope, perhaps the vain hope, is that the expansion offers a fresh opportunity to address these issues. Weighing in at 18 GB in size, Shadow of the Erdtree opens up a generous chunk of new terrain to explore. In effect, it's a separate map to the original Limgrave region, described by Souls fans as being around 50% of the length of the main adventure. The big question then, in the intervening 2 years since the game's original launch and the expansion, has FromSoftware improved the game's performance on console? In fact, do any of the game's modes, like the frame rate, quality, and ray tracing modes on PS5 or Series X, deliver anything close to a locked 60 FPS today? And as for PC, later in this video, my good friend and colleague Alex Battaglia will offer a fresh take on the state of Elden Ring's optimization. Is it any better on PC for today's players? Let's find out. Before we kick off, some thank yous are in order. Access to Shadow of the Erdtree's content has an unusually high bar of entry for a paid DLC. Above all, Namco Bandai recommends you have a character at level 120 or above. Plus, you need to beat 2 optional bosses to qualify, most infamously Mohg, Lord of Blood, and also Star Scourge Radahn. With that in mind, a huge credit must go to Digital Foundry Patreon member Renki for letting me borrow his Xbox profile. Renki's save included a level 152 character, with both bosses beaten including Mohg, and hence full access to the expansion. Likewise, on the PlayStation 5 side, Eurogamer's news editor Ed Nightingale deserves praise for similarly lending his PS5 account with enough progress to access the DLC too. Thank you both. This analysis truly wouldn't have been possible without your help. Here we have it then, Shadow of the Erdtree. Much like those very first steps into Limgrave's open world back in 2022, FromSoftware once again gives us a great sense of the Shadow Realm's scale early on. We begin at the Gravesite Plain, a striking hilltop vantage littered with acres of swaying grass and ghostly gravestones. Mist fills out the valleys and the corners of the ruins ahead. Light shafts pierce through the clouds, and beyond it, the turrets of Castle Ensis loom on the horizon. Pacing forward, vulturous creatures perch overhead, waiting to lunge at a hapless passerby, and as we gallop into a brisk escape, we bump into our first boss, the Furnace Golem. This one, even for our high-leveled characters, is perhaps one to fight another day. Spawning back at our last site of grace, this very first hilltop view is key to Elden Ring's messaging to the player. Purely through visual design, it gives us a vital understanding of our place in a new region. It telegraphs where it's possible to go, where the points of interest are, and which areas of a still blank map need to be plotted in. The game's path branches out in several ways from here, but let it be said that FromSoftware's skill in realizing its art direction, in communicating the possibilities of its world, is still among the best in the business. Shadow of the Erdtree is a beautifully crafted extra slice of Elden Ring, based on what I've seen so far anyway. But that's not to say FromSoftware has addressed all criticisms, far from it. Elden Ring's world design and combat are standout, of course, but in terms of improving the game's technical polish, in optimizing the experience on console or PC, it disappoints. Starting with PS5, Shadow of the Erdtree's new region sadly does not fix the frequent sub-60fps drops. Even on the framerate mode, rendering at a dynamic 1512p to 4K resolution, it struggles to keep 60fps locked down. Around the gravesite plane, we're often running within the 50 to 60fps range. In fairness, these drops are, at times, disguised on displays with variable refresh rate support, or VRR. For as long as PS5 runs within a 48 to 60fps window, VRR engages to give a more perceptually smooth result. The issue is that there's obviously huge potential for it to drop well below 48 FPS. We're down to near 40 FPS in fact, in spawning at the gates of Castle Ensis, and also during the battles with roaming golems. At these moments, PS5 falls outside the VRR window, and hence you'll notice judder. Meanwhile, those without a VRR supporting display will see constant judder all the time as the frame rate wavers up and down the graph. To touch on the other modes on PS5, we have the quality mode of course, and the ray tracing mode. Let's go to a three-way split for this one, using the new Shadow Realm region as a kind of benchmark. The quality mode renders at a native 4K in the middle there, while the ray tracing mode on the far right renders at 1620p. This RT mode was, of course, a late addition to the game in March 2023, adding ray-traced ambient occlusion and shadows to the world. Sadly, optimization of both of these modes has not changed since we last looked at them. On this gravesite plane path, for example, the quality and RT modes often run at a similar 30 to 40 FPS range. Each one of these falls far below the framerate mode's reading, and might as well be running with a 30 FPS cap, if only it were frame-paced evenly. Once we approach more complex structures, like castles and dungeon interiors, the readings of the quality and ray tracing modes start to splinter apart. The design of Castle Ensis, in particular, demands a heavier use of ray-traced ambient occlusion, and as a result, the RT mode falls lower, locking at near the 30 FPS line. You'll notice RT ambient occlusion working its magic across the back of our character's cloak, adding a greater depth to the shading. But just like in the base game, for all the benefits of ray tracing as a feature, we still pay an incredible price for it in performance. More glaringly, this is the only mode where we see drops under 30 FPS, which truly gets in the way of the game's playability. It continues to be a hard mode to recommend, and likewise, the quality mode, rendering at 4K, is a hard sell given it often runs in the 35 to 45 FPS region. In short, no good progress has been made on PS5 after 2 years. Bearing in mind that developer FromSoftware has produced Armored Core 6 with similar framerate issues on console, it's surprising to see that lessons are still not being learned. So, what's the solution? Well, as a reminder, here's how PS5 and Xbox consoles stack up in their native resolutions. In a snapshot, nothing has been fundamentally altered since the base game. The most telling metric, though, is on the framerate mode column there. Even at a dynamic 1512p to 4K range, the game is simply still struggling to run at 60 FPS on PS5 here. Most pixel counts come out at that 1512p number in fact, which is the absolute lower bounds. In other words, in theory, the game might benefit from an even lower bounds, 1440p, 1260p perhaps, or even stretching it down to 1080p to make 60 FPS more viable. There's a way to prove that this might work in running the PS4 version on PS5 via backcompat. We tried this at Elden Ring's launch and on Armored Core 6 as well, given that it's the same engine. Using the PS4 app forces Elden Ring to render at a checkerboarded 1800p, or 1600 by 1800 essentially. Image quality takes a hit. It dials back visual settings in grass density and shadow quality, but the result is a much smoother 60 FPS. There is a working solution already available to us, in other words. The catch being that if you want to switch to the PS4 app today, you'll have to restart your progress. It's hardly ideal, and we need FromSoftware to administer its own proper optimization to the PS5 code. The PS4 app simply proves it's possible with the right setup. Sticking to consoles, let's jump to Series X next. Shadow of the Erdtree's early areas again reveal a big issue in hitting 60 FPS, even using the best case frame rate mode. Typically, we're in the 45 to 60 FPS region here, except Series X often runs at a lower reading when compared directly to PS5. In a two-way split showing each console's frame rate mode, charting the same course through the map, there's a 5 to 8 FPS delta in PS5's favour. Typically, we get this PS5 advantage around major settlements, the gates of Castle Ensis being a major one. Sometimes the PS5 lead is even extended to almost 10 FPS, while at others the two are almost exactly matched. All of this was true for the base Elden Ring game, again proving that no movement has been made to better optimize Series X. Where Series X does have an advantage though, as before, is in its better VRR implementation. On Xbox Series consoles, we have a wider VRR range to work with, between 40Hz and 60Hz in this case, rather than 48 to 60 on PS5. So, despite running at a lower average frame rate, there is inbuilt technology on Series X to help mitigate those drops, to lessen the perceptual judder if your display supports it. However, if we jump to the ray tracing mode on Series X, there's simply no hope for VRR to save it. Sub 30 FPS drops are very possible here, especially where the camera adjusts up and down during this battle. The game's dynamic resolution system is being caught off guard as it tries and fails, causing major sub 30 lurches. Overall, the performance readout on Series X is often worse than PS5's in the quality and ray tracing modes. Between all three, each one of these runs at a lower rate, but just like PS5, it's only really the frame rate mode that's salvageable with VRR. Last up on the console front is Series S. The frame rate mode continues to run at a dynamic 1440p, often at the lower bounds of 1008p in practice. And, sadly, the general frame rate here is often lower than Series X's, at around 45 to 50 FPS in the opening gravesite plane segment. This is still a sufficiently high frame rate, again, for VRR to have an impact, but it's perilously close to falling out of the necessary window. There's still no ray tracing mode included on Series S either, and given the disappointing performance of that mode on the premium consoles, that's maybe the right call. What we do have is the quality mode, supposing you want to fix Series S to 1440p for a crisper image. Again, the expansion's new areas reveal the quality mode's issues in being anything close to performance, if 60 FPS is the target. Comparing the two modes on Series S, we're often looking at a 30 to 40 FPS range for quality mode, which I'd suggest is hardly worth the trade-off for better image quality. In summary, Series S continues to offer the weakest performance of the current-gen consoles, even with the cutbacks in resolution. Finally, we have the situation on PC. Alex is on point here, returning to Elden Ring after a disappointing state at launch with its widespread reports of traversal hitches and more. Over to you, Alex.
The last time I took a look at Elden Ring's PC version, I was not at all pleased with its technical profile, so I was curious to see what Shadow of the Erdtree might change. After loading the game up again with the latest version for that DLC launch, I had an answer to my question incredibly quickly. Shadow of the Erdtree has not changed the technical characteristics of Elden Ring on PC in any meaningful way. In its current state, the game performs much like it did when Rich and I looked at it for the post-launch video entitled, "Yes, Valve really did fix Elden Ring PC for Steam Deck." Much that you saw in that video is the same as it is today. For me, this is extremely disappointing. The game is still arbitrarily locked at 60 FPS with you not being able to push it higher by default in the menus without modding. I do not consider modding a reasonable solution here given the amount of money that this game has shoveled in. They should support it. The game still does not support ultra-wide aspect ratios by default, and on my PC, I had bizarre stretching occurring when trying to run at an ultra-wide 1080p on top of the black bars. The game's visual to performance ratio on the GPU still has me scratching my head, especially when you turn on options like ray trace shadows. The feature may refine issues with shadow map resolution, but they are expensive on the GPU and they can create issues like shadow pop-in, which would not be there with RT off. Furthermore, turning on ray tracing induces great CPU load that leads to constant hitching and stuttering when you have it on, even on very large CPUs like you're seeing here on the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. Take a look at that frame time graph to see how often it sputters. To add insult to injury, the game still does not support the common reconstruction techniques on PC in 2024, which makes turning on ray tracing even less enticing for mid-range GPUs. The last nail in the coffin for me is that the game still suffers from consistent and constant frame time spikes due to CPU performance for some reason when moving around the game world. When running my optimized compromise settings that I made over 2 years ago on the Ryzen 5 3600 and an RTX 4060, it is plain as day to see that the game, with the latest patch, still has incredible issues delivering smooth frame times when you just move the thumbstick forward. With VSync forced off using the NVIDIA driver, you can see that the line is smooth occasionally on the frame time graph, but then you move a little bit and it'll cause frame time perturbations, which could look uneven on a VRR monitor. And then on top of that, you have the hitches which show up alongside those perturbations, usually in the realm of 33.3 milliseconds or higher on the Ryzen 5 3600. These frame time spikes occur every few meters really in my measurement and make the game look unsmooth to the naked eye. Given how the game has the technical density and quality of something that came out in 2015, I'm just kind of in awe at how this issue is happening in the first place. On a higher end CPU like the 7800X 3D, you can reduce the frequency of how often these hitches will occur, but they occur nonetheless, just with greater distance between when they're happening. So you can get a better experience on a better CPU, but given what we're seeing on screen here visually, and I'm not even using ray tracing here, I'm just confused as to why I'm still seeing hitches on a 7800X 3D in a game that looks like this. So things are bad just like we measured years ago. Things may though in fact be worse in some ways too. For some reason, in the version I'm playing now, I have seen that VSync cannot always work correctly. So if you have a fixed refresh rate display, the game now can have unexplainable frame drops with VSync on. Check this out here. Moving in spot with VSync on, with those aforementioned settings on the Ryzen 5 3600, shows drops into the 40s that are visible to the naked eye with VSync on. But RivetTuner Statistics Server is not picking up these drops for some reason. Our tools are picking them up though quite well. With VSync off in that same area, spinning the camera doesn't show the same issue with the frame rate. Somehow VSync is not working here correctly all the time, and it works worse than it did at launch, and it's causing drop frames that should not be happening. I cannot explain why this is occurring. The worst thing I find in Erdtree is that the game still also randomly can drop to 0 FPS. I measured it happening this time on the Ryzen 5 3600 just as I measured it happening years ago on the Core i9-10900K. If you Google this issue, you will find that thousands of people have had it, and they have tried all manner of workarounds on their PC to try and fix it. Other games don't have this issue, so it is not your PC's fault. The only issue here is FromSoftware and their inability to make technically sound products. I'm being harsh on purpose here. FromSoftware needs to stop releasing things of such poor technical quality given how much money they bring in and how much money the products demand. Shadow of the Erdtree here does nothing to meaningfully solve the issues the game had years ago, and in fact it may be worse in some areas. I don't find that acceptable, but that is all I have to say on the PC front here, so back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Alex. Certainly the point of Elden Ring's huge success is worth mentioning. That over the course of 2 years, money is simply not being reinvested to improve its technical polish on PC or console. This critique comes from a place of genuine respect for what FromSoftware has achieved with its Soul series. Very few developers match this studio's craft in world building and 3D combat, but on PC and console, we're seeing a developer, time and time again, ignoring key technical issues. I'd dare say the PC situation is worse, especially for a first-time player. At least on console, we broadly avoid those glaring traversal hitches. Even on PS5, Series X and S though, ideally we must have VRR-enabled displays for the best way to play. A further hardware investment to cover for the game's poor optimization. It's simply not fair to put this burden on the end user, and Shadow of the Erdtree's release, once again, reminds us that obvious, persistent issues are being ignored. That's all from me today though. If you did enjoy this analysis, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video and many more, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.